A woman can like you. She can enjoy your attention. She can even sleep with you, and still not respect you. And when respect is missing, desire always has a ceiling. It never fully opens. Because there's a difference most men never learn to see. Temporary attraction versus long-term power. Being noticed versus being respected. You didn't lose her respect because you were too nice. You lost it because of quiet, self-destructive attitudes you carry every day without realizing it. These attitudes aren't loud. They don't look dramatic. They leak through small behaviors, hesitations, over-adjustments, emotional self-betrayal. And here's the part most men miss. Women don't think their way to this conclusion. They feel it, long before you're aware it's happening. In this video, I'm breaking down 5 male attitudes that decide whether a woman sees you as optional or undeniable. This isn't about tricks, lines, or chasing approval. I don't teach men how to impress women. I teach men how to become the kind of man women instinctively adjust to. These are internal attitudes, not surface tactics, and each one changes how women respond to you without you forcing anything. If you want the truth most men never hear, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me, because this is about taking your power back, not feeling good for 5 minutes. Number 1. You don't need to be liked. Most men don't wake up thinking, I need her approval. They tell themselves a nicer story. They call it being respectful, emotionally intelligent, mature, easygoing. But underneath all of that lives a quiet belief that controls everything. If she approves of me, I'm safe. And that belief doesn't show up in grand gestures. It leaks out through small, forgettable behaviors. You hesitate before you speak. You soften opinions you actually believe in. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You agree faster than you should. You tolerate small moments of disrespect just to keep the peace. None of this looks dramatic. That's why it's dangerous. Because while you may not notice it, a woman does. Not consciously. She doesn't sit there analyzing your behavior. She feels it. She feels a man who is constantly adjusting himself instead of directing himself. A man who is reacting instead of leading. And where leadership disappears, respect quietly follows. Here's the part men miss. Needing to be liked isn't about kindness. It's about self-abandonment. It's about slowly trading your center for approval. Every time you choose harmony over honesty, you teach her something about your hierarchy, and you're not at the top of it. From her perspective, this doesn't register as empathy. It registers as instability, as someone who cannot hold his ground when tension appears. Women don't lose respect for imperfect men. They lose respect for men who don't trust themselves under pressure, for men whose identity bends the moment connection feels threatened. And the tragedy is this. The more you chase approval, the less valuable it becomes. Because approval only has weight when it comes from someone who doesn't need it. The moment you stop needing to be liked, something subtle but powerful shifts. A man who needs approval is always reacting. He waits for cues. He scans for emotional weather. He adjusts himself to avoid friction. His behavior is shaped by her mood. A man who doesn't need it leads. This is where a lot of men misunderstand the message. Not needing to be liked does not mean being cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. That's not strength. That's armor. And armor is still fear. Real strength looks quieter. It means you don't abandon yourself just to keep things smooth. You let disagreement exist without rushing to fix it. You allow tension without panicking. You don't scramble to repair her emotions so you can feel okay again. A self-directed man doesn't rehearse every sentence before he speaks. He says no without apologizing for having a boundary. He disagrees without becoming defensive. He stays calm when he's misunderstood. And when necessary, he can walk away without explaining himself into exhaustion. Not because he's cruel, but because he's centered. This is what being rooted actually means. Your sense of self doesn't collapse the moment harmony is threatened. You don't need to be constantly validated to trust your own judgment. And when you trust yourself, she feels it. It creates gravity. It creates safety. It creates respect. Here's the paradox most men struggle with. The less you try to be liked, the more your approval starts to matter. Because approval from someone who doesn't need it feels earned. Women don't respect men who are perfect. They respect men who remain solid when pressure shows up. Men who don't bend themselves out of shape just to be chosen. So stop aiming to be likable. Aim to be rooted. That's where respect actually begins. Number 2, you move at your own pace. Most men think they rush because they care too much, because they're excited, because they don't want to lose something good. But rushing isn't driven by love. It's driven by uncertainty. When a man speeds up, texts back immediately, pushes to define the relationship, tries to lock things down early, what he's really saying is this: I don't trust myself to be okay if this doesn't work out. And women feel that instantly. You see it play out the same way every time. You meet a woman you're interested in. Things feel good. Then she pulls back just a little. Slower replies. Less enthusiasm. A shift you can't quite explain. A man who moves at her pace panics. He sends a long message. He asks what changed. He tries to fix the vibe. He over-clarifies his feelings. He speeds up emotionally the moment uncertainty appears. And the message underneath all of it is clear. If this connection becomes unstable, so do I. That's the moment respect starts to leak out. Because rushing doesn't communicate desire. It communicates fragility. It tells her that your emotional center depends on her behavior. That when things slow down, you lose your footing. From her perspective, this isn't comforting. It's pressure. She starts to feel like she's carrying the emotional weight of the connection. And when a woman feels responsible for your stability, attraction quietly shuts down. Respect doesn't survive urgency. It survives steadiness. The question every woman is unconsciously asking is simple. When things become unclear, does this man stay grounded, or does he collapse? How you move when things slow down tells her everything she needs to know. Emotional leadership has very little to do with control, and everything to do with pace. When you move at her pace, she becomes the prize. Her moods dictate the rhythm. Her uncertainty decides your behavior, and slowly, without a single argument, you hand over your center. When you move at your own pace, you keep it. This is where men get confused, so let's be precise. Moving at your own pace does not mean playing games. It doesn't mean withholding affection. It doesn't mean disappearing to provoke a reaction. Those are tactics driven by insecurity, not strength. What it actually means is this: you stay interested without overcorrecting. You notice shifts without letting them hijack your behavior. You don't speed up emotionally just because she slows down. From a woman's perspective, this is everything. Women are constantly testing for emotional leadership, not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. When things become unclear, when emotions fluctuate, when certainty fades, one question rises to the surface. Does this man stay grounded, or does he chase stability through me? A man who stays steady sends a powerful signal. He's saying, I enjoy you, but I don't abandon myself for outcomes. He doesn't rush to secure reassurance. He doesn't pressure her to resolve ambiguity so he can feel okay again. And that's the turning point. The moment a woman realizes she can't rush you, pressure you, or pull you off your axis, the dynamic shifts. Curiosity replaces control. Respect replaces leverage. She's no longer setting the pace. She's responding to yours. Because when your uncertainty doesn't turn into urgency, your presence becomes solid. And solid men don't need to chase attraction. They give it something stable to attach to. Number 3. You hold standards without announcing them. Most men believe standards work better when they're explained. They think clarity creates respect, that if they just communicate their boundaries well enough, they'll be taken seriously. It sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. And it's exactly why it fails. The moment you announce a standard, you turn it into a discussion. And the moment it becomes a discussion, it becomes something that can be negotiated. You see this all the time. A woman does something that doesn't sit right with you. Instead of adjusting your behavior, you sit her down and explain. I just want consistency. When you do this, it makes me feel a certain way. I need you to understand my expectations. What you think you're doing is leadership. What she often feels is something very different. She doesn't feel authority. She feels bargaining. From her perspective, it sounds like you're asking her to change so you can stay comfortable. You're not holding a line. You're trying to preserve access. And bargaining always weakens position. Always. Here's the hard truth. Women don't respect standards that need defending. If a boundary requires a speech, it doesn't feel solid. It feels conditional. This is where respect quietly erodes. Because the more you explain, the more you invite testing. And when a woman senses that your standards depend on her cooperation, she stops experiencing them as real. Bargaining doesn't create alignment. It creates leverage. And once leverage enters the dynamic, respect leaves. A man who has to explain why something matters is already on the defensive. A man with true standards doesn't argue for them because they're not up for debate. That's the difference most men never see until it's too late. Real standards are quiet. They are not rules you enforce on other people. They are filters you apply to your own investment. This is where most men get it wrong. They think having standards means correcting behavior, teaching lessons, calling things out, drawing lines and making sure she understands them. That's not standards. That's management. A man with real standards doesn't try to control how a woman behaves. He simply decides how much access she gets based on how she behaves. Less availability, less emotional access, less effort, no punishment, no attitude, no speeches, just alignment. And this is uncomfortable for most men, because quiet standards don't give you relief. You don't get to vent. You don't get to feel heard. You don't get closure. You have to sit with the possibility that someone won't rise to what you expect, and you may have to walk away without explanation. That's exactly why it works. Men avoid this because talking feels safer than adjusting. Explaining feels easier than losing access. Negotiating feels better than accepting misalignment. So they speak instead of act. And every time they do, they trade authority for connection. From a woman's perspective, quiet standards are unmistakable. She starts paying attention, not to your words, but to your consistency. She notices that you don't chase when she pulls back, that you don't reward behavior that doesn't align, that your investment is calm, measured, and selective. And that creates curiosity. Because now, she's not negotiating rules. She's reading behavior. She's feeling the weight of a man who doesn't need cooperation to hold his ground. Here's the truth. Women don't rise to standards you announce. They rise to standards you live, without apology. When your standards are embodied instead of explained, respect doesn't need to be requested. It's assumed. Number 4, you're emotionally steady under pressure. Women respect emotional stability more than most men realize. Not loud confidence, not charm, stability. Because pressure is where everything gets exposed, and pressure shows up in simple everyday ways. Mixed signals, delayed replies, hot and cold behavior, sudden distance, silence, disagreements, emotional ambiguity, moments where you're no longer in control of how things feel. This is where men split into 2 categories. The reactive man feels the shift and immediately moves to resolve his discomfort. He demands clarity. He sends messages fishing for reassurance. He becomes passive-aggressive. He over-explains his feelings. or he swings between withdrawal and emotional intensity, trying to regain control. The steady man does something very different. He notices, he pauses, he stays centered. He responds without reacting. He doesn't dramatize uncertainty. He doesn't punish silence. He doesn't chase clarity just to calm his nerves. His behavior doesn't spike just because the emotional weather changed. And here's what most men don't understand. Women don't create pressure to be cruel. Pressure isn't a test you fail because she's unfair. Pressure reveals who you are when you're no longer comfortable. When uncertainty makes you anxious, defensive, or needy, she feels that instantly. Not as closeness, but as weight. Emotional instability doesn't create intimacy. It creates responsibility. And the moment a woman feels responsible for regulating your emotions, respect starts to fade. Stability, on the other hand, communicates something powerful without words. This man can hold himself together even when things aren't clear. That's not emotional numbness. That's emotional leadership. And leadership under pressure is where respect is either built or lost. Steadiness is rare, and rarity is what gives it weight. Here's a situation most men recognize instantly. She pulls back for a few days. Fewer messages, less warmth, no explanation, nothing dramatic, just enough distance to trigger uncertainty. The reactive man immediately assumes danger. He sends a check-in text. Then another. He asks if something is wrong. He explains how much he likes her. He looks for reassurance so he can calm himself down. What she feels isn't closeness. It's pressure. The steady man notices the same shift and does something far less visible. He doesn't disappear. He doesn't punish. He doesn't chase. He stays consistent. He gives space without withdrawing his presence. His tone doesn't change just because her mood did. That balance is rare. And because it's rare, it stands out. This is where another misunderstanding needs to die. Emotional steadiness does not mean suppressing emotions. It doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means your emotions don't get to drive your behavior. You can feel uncertainty without acting from fear. You can feel disappointment without collapsing. You can feel attraction without losing yourself in it. That's masculine emotional intelligence. From a woman's perspective, a man like this feels grounding. Not overwhelming. Not needy. Not volatile. He creates emotional space instead of consuming it. And that space is what allows attraction to deepen instead of suffocate. When a man can hold emotional tension without trying to immediately resolve it, something shifts. She relaxes. She feels safe to move closer on her own terms, because she's no longer managing his reactions. Men who can do this are uncommon, and uncommon men are respected. Steadiness doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when pressure shows up and you don't fall apart. Number 5, you value your life more than the relationship. This is the one men resist the most because it sounds selfish, cold, like you don't care. But in reality, it's the foundation of lasting respect. The moment a woman becomes the center of your life, something important disappears. Your gravity. When your sense of direction depends on her presence, she feels it. When losing her would collapse your routine, your confidence, your purpose, she feels that too. Not as love, but as weight. It shows up in familiar ways. You stop going to the gym because she wants more time. You see your friends less because she doesn't like them. You slow down on your goals because the relationship feels good enough. You tell yourself you're investing. What you're actually doing is over-prioritizing. From her perspective, this doesn't feel secure. It feels unstable. Because a man who abandons his own life for connection eventually expects the relationship to carry him. And no woman wants to be the source of a man's identity. That pressure quietly erodes respect. A man who values his life more than the relationship still shows up. He still cares. He still commits. But he doesn't trade his mission for intimacy. He doesn't shrink to keep peace. He doesn't chase to avoid loss. His life already has structure, movement, and meaning. The relationship fits into it. It doesn't replace it. And that distinction matters more than most men realize. When a woman senses that you would still be grounded, focused, and moving forward, even without her, something clicks. She doesn't feel responsible for holding you together. She feels invited to walk beside you. Men without gravity cling. Men with gravity are chosen. Respect doesn't grow where your life disappears. It grows where your life remains intact. Valuing your life more than the relationship doesn't mean you detach. It means you stay anchored. An anchored man doesn't disappear emotionally. He doesn't withhold care. He doesn't treat commitment like a weakness. He shows up with presence, consistency, and intention. But what he never does is dissolve his identity into the relationship. This is the difference most men miss. An anchored man still prioritizes his body, his work, his discipline, his direction, his friendships, his inner standards. The relationship is important, but it's not the source of his meaning. It's not the thing holding his life together. And women feel that immediately. Because when a man leads his life, he doesn't cling. He doesn't need reassurance to stay stable. He doesn't negotiate his purpose for approval. He invites a woman into a life that's already moving, rather than asking her to become the reason it moves at all. That invitation carries weight. From her perspective, this creates choice without pressure. She isn't responsible for motivating you. She isn't carrying your direction. She isn't propping up your sense of self. She's simply deciding whether she wants to walk beside you. And that's where respect deepens. Anchored men don't demand loyalty. They don't fear loss. They don't shrink to keep peace. They don't perform value. They live it. And because their world doesn't revolve around the relationship, their presence inside it feels solid, calm, and dependable. This is the foundation everything else rests on. Respect doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from standing firmer. When your life has a center, your relationships align around it. When you hold your ground, women don't feel the need to test it endlessly. They respond to it. Not because you ask them to, but because strength, when it's real, doesn't need convincing. Respect doesn't come from what you say. It comes from how you move, how you respond, and what you refuse to tolerate. These 5 attitudes don't make you more entertaining. They don't make you smoother. They don't make you better at dating. They make you unignorable. Because when you stop needing approval, you stop shrinking. When you move at your own pace, you stop chasing certainty. When you live your standards instead of announcing them, you stop negotiating your value. When you stay steady under pressure, you stop becoming emotional weight. And when your life has its own gravity, you stop asking to be chosen. Here's the part I want you to sit with. If you've ever been pulled close and then pushed away, if you've ever felt like you were trying harder while being respected less, if you've ever sensed that no matter what you did, the dynamic never fully shifted, the problem was never that you didn't care enough. It's that somewhere along the way, you abandoned your center. Women don't adjust their behavior because you ask them to. They adjust when they feel a man who is rooted, steady, and self-directed. When you stand firm, they don't feel the need to test endlessly. They respond. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming solid. If this hits something real for you, subscribe. This channel exists to give men the truth without softening it. Drop a comment with the insight that landed hardest, and share this with a man who's been trying to earn respect instead of embodying it. Because when you stand your ground, the world doesn't need convincing. It realigns around you.